As your network automation practice evolves, so should your tools. Don't manage your collections of Ansible playbooks and Python scripts artisanally. Move up to Itential and load your automations onto a scalable platform your whole team can use. Visit itential.com to find out more. That's itential.com.
Hello and welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Cho, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. In today's show, we're thrilled to have a very special guest joining us, William Collins. William is a dynamic force in the world of technology. As a passionate tech evangelist, he's on a mission to bridge the gap between cutting-edge innovation and everyday users with his courses, podcasts, and blogs, then of course his full-time job, and we'll dig into that a little bit later. You will find him breaking down complex topics in network engineering and cloud computing, as well as sharing the latest trends and best practices. In fact, William and I share a lot of things in common. We both have podcasts, LinkedIn Learning courses, which is not that common, and we're both USNUA organizers and Amazon community builders. So many things in common, which I just found out when I researched his background on LinkedIn profiles. So, William, my virtual twin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. That is really crazy how many things just coincidentally we happen to, be part of that are the same. Really awesome. And as someone who is one of your books on the shelf at home, I'm a longtime fan. So yeah, glad to be on.
Thank you. Thank you. The mutual admiration, I promise, dear listeners, it will stop right here. but uh, but it is indeed a lot of coincidence because I know how hard it is to kind of get the content going, the content game. It's, people think it's just kind of you sit on your right or you just sit down, you turn on camera. It's not the case, right? Usually what I find out is for every 10 minutes of either course or kind of like content, it takes about an hour for preparation. Just like this episode, it takes time to, do the research, jot down notes, and plan out the scheduling and everything else. So yeah, how did you come to this place? How did you end up being a content creator and a tech evangelist?
That's a good question.
Maybe we should refer back to like 100+ episodes in your Cloud Gambit podcast.
Sometimes I don't even know. So I guess starting out, I would say that kind of like my career pretty much began early on, kind of by accident. So
Hmm.
like a long time ago, like back in the like mid 90s, I suppose. Someone that I knew gave me this like magazine and like this stack of floppy disks. And it was how to install Slackware Linux. And I was like, oh, what is this thing?
Yeah.
And like many hours later, I don't even think it was hours, I think it was days later, Windows 95 was no more on my parents' computer.
Hmm.
So it's funny because I feel like a relic sometimes at this point because all the kids growing up in tech now, they didn't even get the amazing opportunity to experience like CD-ROM, let alone having to like use two different floppy disks for boot and for root. And
Yeah.
we're not even like to the base system yet. So yeah, kind of going way back in like science experiment type stuff, which little did I know at that time, like that was a long time ago. And, putting together these commands in a file and like running a bash script, like, oh, this is like actually like a career path. So from there, like I was fortunate in that like my high school that I went to had this like a vocational school kind of attached to it. And I went through the Cisco Networking Academy and I took my CCNA in high school and I failed it. Then I took it again in high school and I passed it the second time.
Nice.
And like during that time, I got to participate in this like business co-op with a contract to hire attached to it, which, landed me at a small ISP. So that's kind of like where my career began. But as far as like tech evangelism stuff, I think it's funny because my grandmother called me and, my mom had told her I'd gotten a new, I'd switched jobs and this was like my title. And she called me and she's like, so are you doing IT support for like a big church? Is that what you do now? And I'm like,
Like
no, not quite.
evangelism.
Yeah, not quite. And she's like,
Yeah.
good. I didn't want to see you be a televangelist. I'm like, yeah, you don't have to worry about that. But I never really had an inspiration to be a tech evangelist or content creator, to be honest. It just kind of happened. I had a lot of time under my belt, like deploying just different types of technologies over the years, enterprise and startup. And I like experimenting and teaching. So what tech evangelism was to me, I guess, wasn't new. It was kind of the aspects of what I've been doing for a long time, which was, taking lots of like, okay, public speaking, storytelling, and presentation skills, and, that I picked up in the years in enterprise and kind of building a full mesh topology to like all the cool technical things I was working on as well.
That's awesome. I mean, I just found out three more things that we have in common, right? Because first is I went through the floppy disk era as well. And, lucky for you, Slackware was only like 25. If you install Windows 3, it's like, oh my God, it's 50. And you're right, right? Like you're just
Yeah.
like swapping out the floppy disk. And lucky for me, I did have a 5 point, whatever, like 5-inch disk. But, by the time I started to install, it was like 3-inch disc or whatnot. So I even went through the era of like a zip drive. Do you remember those?
No, I didn't get to work with those.
The ginormous 3 gig storage, right? As opposed to like 500 meg or breaking down into, a couple tens of megs. But yeah, so that was another similarities that we have. And obviously, content creation and tech evangelist, because right now my role is also a network automation advocate at Network to Code. So my God, it's just like we just follow the same path. And like I kind of have this mix of business and technology. And I think that's why it's kind of this hybrid that we both experience is that, I was a business major, I was a finance major with a CIS minor. And I also started out at an ISP. I don't know how big your ISP was, but mine was like a second tier in Southern California, which means I get to do a lot of stuff and just jack of all trades, like installing systems and rebuilding, compiling the kernels for Linux, and then, do the clicky clicky thing with Windows.
I love it. But think about how much you learned at that time. Like, I would never want to work with floppies again,
Hmm.
of course. If you land in a Ferrari, you don't want to go and drive a bicycle to work or something. It's just that much of a difference. But at the same time, I learned so much. And I think it's hard for, I think, folks coming out of school these days because they're not landed at like some of the foundational levels that some of us had to go through. Like we were born in a different time and we got into like more of the underlying nuts and bolts, which I think for me anyway, it like helped me learn how to learn so like I could keep continuing to learn. And now there's just so much stuff everywhere. It's like, where do I start? It can be challenging.
Yeah, I hear the same thing. However, which I agree with you that, it was eye opening to me at the ISP. I was like, oh, you could build a whole business around, bind, right? Just DNS hosting. You could build a whole email server system and people actually pay you to have the email storage or, like kind of email store before they pop it down to their local laptop. And so all of these were just end up being a single text file even. And I was just so amazed at the amount of work that you could do. And all those would not have come around unless you have the kind of exposure that you have at a startup or during that era where everything's just moving so fast and everybody's speeding toward, this end goal of being IPOs and so on. That ISP ended up being belly up and bankrupt, but that's another story. But you touched on a good point on the mindset and learning how to learn. And I want to double click on that. So, what is your take on your style of learning and how do you learn a new things? As you mentioned, everything is, moving at such a fast pace nowadays. There's just so many things to learn. So, I'd like to pick your brain on your thoughts on that.
So the way that I learned, I was fortunate when I started work and when I started the second big company I went to, like after the ISP, I went to a multinational professional services company that was bigger.
All right.
And that was my first time being in like a really big company. And I had some really good leaders that maybe their style like today wouldn't have been good just kind of because things have changed. Like one of them was ex-military and if I did something wrong or if I was not doing something, I heard about it immediately and it was like, what in the world are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Come here. And like he would just whiteboard immediately. And that was like one of the good things about being in the office and having like a gigantic whiteboard
Yeah.
is he would like make sure, like, sometimes if you're kind of like in a conversation and you just want the conversation, you got to move on and you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. And you just move on. Like he was the kind of person that would make sure that I knew exactly what he was telling me. Like I'd have to recite it back and he just was meticulous.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I learned early on was like my style of learning, like I love tinkering with things, but if I read something, yeah, that's great. And I learn a lot from reading. Like you were saying, podcast preparation. I do a lot of reading these days and I love it. I actually love sitting down. I have calendar time blocked out for it.
Yeah.
But I like practice by doing. Like if I'm going to learn a new tool, well, what do I got to do? It's probably got some sort of open source variant. I'm downloading it. I'm running it against free tier infrastructure. I still have some infrastructure in my basement. Like my CCIE lab I still had it like last year. It's funny because getting that rack out of my basement was really hard. It was like the full depth 42U cabinet
Oh, wow.
like ages ago that I got used. I drove like 200 miles to get it somewhere and had it in all these pieces.
Mm.
Good times. But yeah, like some of the gear that I had that I got rid of last year was stuff that I've had since I was in like, since I had to have like my mom order it like on eBay when I couldn't. So yeah, just my process is like trying to understand the principles behind something and really landing on foundational stuff that I think is going to remain valuable. Like TCP/IP, that's a good example. I've got the book on the shelf and I still refer to it, back to it sometimes. But like having like a few things that I'm deep in that I keep up with, but then all the contextual stuff and all the surrounding areas I think are very important as well. So just going through and like using like Terraform or OpenTofu as an example, like a lot of folks, like you can say, okay, it manages the state, it's declarative, yada, yada, yada. But I've seen that it's really hard for many practitioners to really grasp how this paradigm works unless they set it up and they use it and they actually
Mm.
deploy some infrastructure and tear it down, store their state files somewhere outside of their machine. So once they do those things, they're like, oh, I get it. And it's like, well, I did get it before. Like I thought that I got it, but now I really get it. So I'm kind of like that kind of learner where I like to be hands on.
Do you think content creation was a natural way for you to deepen that learning? Or how did you decide to not just learn it, but share your knowledge as well?
That is a good question. So LinkedIn Learning, as far as content there, the reason I started those courses, well, they actually reached out to me, but they let me like have sort of autonomy as far as like what I wanted the courses to
Hmm.
be around. And I really chose the topics I chose just because there was a gap. Like there was nothing on LinkedIn Learning
Yep.
covering that stuff. And I was fresh off doing a lot of that stuff in a big enterprise, well, multiple big enterprise environments. So I had like a PhD direct on the ground from doing this stuff, like bleeding edge. And I was like, what better time? Why it's all packed in my head. And, we've cut over all these data centers, set up all these colos, set up all this cloud connectivity. I was ingrained in Terraform pretty heavily and, it was just good timing. And I think the other stuff, like the more, I guess, like the looser content stuff, like my own personal YouTube and like the short form videos and stuff, I've just been kind of things that I think are like really interesting that I think are important to know. Like I'll put videos out on as well, but it's hard to keep up the pace with some of the folks out there. Like John Capobianco pumps out videos like,
5 a day.
yeah, like I was reading like some announcement. It's so funny. I was reading an announcement for something new that was released a few months ago. And like as I was like reading the announcement, he had a video posted on it. It like popped up on my LinkedIn feed.
Hmm.
And he had already like tested it out and made a video on it. Like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
How do you find time to get to it that quick? It's rather impressive.
Yeah, something about cloud code, and it's like, oh, John's like, oh, I already formed an opinion on it because I spent 10 hours and I was a beta user and it worked this with selector and all that stuff. So yeah, so maybe we should cover some of the things that you do, like you said, right? Like maybe your courses were more opportunistic and they let you pick your video content, like YouTube contents are whatever you find interesting, but sporadic, but something that you do on podcasts, obviously on the weekly basis and so on. So maybe we could cover some of your channels and how you spread around your attention these days.
Yeah, so the podcast, like I'd say the video content is one thing, but the podcast is like everything's very intentional. So the last startup that I worked for before Itential, I got to go around and, I got to talk to different adjacent fields a lot of times, and even like some like folks in venture capital and some other founders and such. So being in that world for a little while kind of opened up my eyes, just kind of like how brittle a startup can be sometimes and why you see so many startups fail. It's not easy.
Hmm.
And there's significant risk that one has to take if they want to go down that journey, and they have to be all in. There's no, like, I'm going to give like 90%. Like, you have to be all in all the time. And it's such a small group of individuals, and timing is so important. So, getting into like dilution of ownership. I mean, that was another thing too. When I was in enterprise, I was in charge of a few teams a while back, and especially when cloud computing came on the scene, like we needed more talent and we sort of exhausted our local talent in Kentucky. There's not a ton of cloud experts in Kentucky, it turns out.
Sure, sure.
We're like, looking West Coast and other places and trying to hire remotely. And one thing I discovered was like we had some really great compensation packages, but they weren't just base salary. Like there was like options involved, RSUs, stuff like that. And a lot of the time folks would ask like, why would I want these things? This isn't anything. It's not money. Well, yeah, it is money. This is how it works. And then I'd have to explain it. And then once they understood it, they're like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool.
Hmm.
Yeah. So there was kind of a lack of understanding in some of those surrounding areas. And that's why I started the Cloud Gambit, is because like I was sort of at this intersection of companies still thinking cloud was so risky,
Hmm.
and just this is before AI like blew everything up. And then I had my experience in enterprise. It was still fresh, startup experience. And I was like working in all these areas. And I was kind of at the intersection of these areas. And we tend to get siloed sometimes. Like when I was just raw, like network engineering, like years and years ago, I just cared about my little tower that I was in, my network engineering tower. And, hey, prove it that the network's wrong. And of course, we'd have to prove that it wasn't the network. But there was always that silo that you would fall into. And that was one of the skills that I was luckily able to sort of develop over the years, is extending that olive branch and like being able to work with adjacent teams. Back to the question. So the content, we do like bi-weekly with the Cloud Gambit. It's Avon Sharp and I,
Hmm.
which actually we're going to be, I think the announcement episode we're going to be making is next week.
Right.
So this will be old news probably, but yeah, we're going to be joining the Packet Pushers family of podcasts.
Where's my sound effect of cheering? I don't have it, so not with the location I'm in. So clap, clap, clap. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, really looking forward to that. It's going to be great. I think the first episode under the Packet Pushers umbrella goes out on July. Well, I want to say like the 21st or the sometime in July.
Yeah, no worries. This episode is scheduled for August release. So by the time you hear it, you would have already known, if you follow the Packet Pusher feed, that the Cloud Gambit is going to be on Packet Pushers, which I'm really looking forward to, because I think the trend is toward aggregation, right? Like you're seeing Anthropic just announced like one price plan for all of their AI stuff, right? Like, Cloud Code and, like the chat interface and the APIs versus say OpenAI that has different charge plans for the ChatGPT versus their API and so on and so forth. So I think the aggregation and having this inclusive but yet specialized platform is really the way that things are going. So now we're colleagues. Again, another
Yes.
similarities now. That I think that's the way to go. And I enjoy what you talked about on just this being at the intersection of different things, right? Because it is a different skill set, or it's a different mindset even to maneuver around business versus just technology. Like you said, the RSUs, and for people who don't know, it's basically if you're pre-IPO, then it's not an RSU, it's an option to buy for like certain strike price. So you have that locked in price with the potential upside. And for RSU is for companies who are already public. Usually it's a grant, so you have the $0. So the upside is unlimited with the downside already known. So I think those are the kind of stuff that you don't really know until you get that offer letter and you wonder what it was. So you don't get to practice the negotiation or anything like that. I know I didn't get it until, a couple times in, and I know my own preference of being, compensated by performance, that I usually do better that way and so on and so forth. But what I wish I had done was to know that from the beginning, which, I think I could get that more if I had listened to Cloud Gambit.
Yeah, you've got to be able to advocate for yourself. And that's the thing. You've got to
Yeah,
know kind of the basis of how it works. So if you're getting a fair offer, if it's a good offer.
right.
And, that way you can counter offer. But like when you counter offer, you kind of need to know a little bit of what you're talking about. And you have to say, hey, this is what
Yeah, you don't want to offend anybody
exactly.
asking for the moon, and they were like, no, this is just a newbie, right? Versus somebody who knows the range and asking for like the upper end.
Yeah, exactly. And like also like yeah, the consolidation of tech is kind of like, especially when you go up to cloud, like security and network are so interconnected, or I should correct that, like network security and network engineering are kind of have almost been like consolidated in a sense. Like I've talked to quite a few companies over the past like 2 years where they've actually consolidated. They used to be separate towers essentially. Like the folks that managed firewalls did firewall rules and all that stuff were kind of like a separate team. And
Hmm.
a lot of companies are kind of consolidating that at this point, which is interesting.
I mean, we could already saw that. We already saw this trend, and maybe it may not have happened in network engineering, but we used to have DevOps team and systems engineering and developers, and now it's all in just one group. And it's only a matter of time, in my opinion, that they're going to consolidate even more. But sorry I cut you off. You had more thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I was just going to go into like how it's probably going to go under some further consolidation because with AI becoming real now, like, and it's been real. I'm not saying it hasn't been real, but thinking of like what real means as far as like the use cases that like an enterprise is like willing to pay for. Like
Yeah.
you had all these cool things that were being built, but they didn't reach like critical mass with like valid use cases. So then enterprises weren't buying things. And then what is the point of building all these data centers then? So AI is getting some real traction too, which is going to, I think, make that consolidation go a little faster.
Yeah, I agree. I think actually you said it wasn't real before and then it's real, and I would roger that. When I hear my 70-year-old mom talk about AI, or when my 13-year-old is talking about AI as well, then I know we've reached a critical mass and it's the top of mind for people. And not just talking about it, but using it, right? Like the teachers teaching them about how to do prompts, or what's the ethical way of using AI for your homework, or these are the limits that you could do, versus maybe if we roll back maybe 2 3 years ago on crypto, then people will be talking about crypto and have no idea what it was. They don't even have a wallet, right? Like there's a, what do I need a wallet? Or they think Bitcoin is actually a coin, like you would 3D print some coin and go, this is Bitcoin, and it's costing whatever $3,000 at the time. So I think that's the difference that I saw between these two technology waves. One is actually seeping deep into involve people's everyday work versus something that was they read about it on the news and wanting to know more about it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
And now a brief sponsor message from Itential. If you're like me, your network automation skill set is an evolving one. You've probably done some Ansible and Python work and you've had some quick wins, but now you're getting to that point where you want other people in your team to use the automations that you've built. They're sort of okay with Ansible, right? They're definitely not 100%, but they're okay. However, they do not want to figure out Python, and they can't even manage the library dependencies. Most of the folks on your team, what do they want? They want you to give them a thing that they can run and it just works. And if it doesn't, any network task requiring automation comes back to your queue. I call this the platform problem. You need a platform that the whole team can use to run automations without them having to know anything about maintaining a Python environment or even how to run an Ansible playbook. And this is the service Itential provides across their product portfolio. You've created a bunch of network automations. All right, now move them from your laptop into a repository and then let Itential execute them in a scalable, secure way that abstracts details from people that don't need to know while giving access to every nuance for those people that do need to know, people like you. Itential puts you on the road to self-service network automation, allowing anyone you like to run your automation, all while integrating with all the other systems that your organization runs. And to me, this is the ultimate destination for network automation systems: self-service. To find out more about Itential's products and how they help you build an automation platform, visit itential.com. You can test drive Itential free for 30 days. That is itential.com.
I agree. It's funny you mentioned grandma because my grandma, same grandma that thought I was a televangelist.
Yeah, but join the tech choir.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she saw it on the news. I don't know, but she had a pretty good idea earlier on of what ChatGPT was, and she still couldn't like patch her own laptop,
Yeah.
or needed help with her phone and stuff. But she knew all about the AI, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting, And everybody uses it
Yeah.
these days. Like actually the younger generation, there's numbers out there that you can look at just by like age group and adoption. And the younger crowd is definitely, they've already replaced Google search as their homepage with like ChatGPT or Claude's homepage, so they can just pop right in and start prompting. But if you think about when ChatGPT first sort of came out, there was a lot of hype and there was some things that it did like really well.
Hmm. Like copywriting.
Yeah, but I think as I'm trying to organize my thoughts, like AI at that time, it was somewhat trapped.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it referred to as like the integration death valley, which is a
Mm.
seems like a dismal doom and gloom name. But, which is to say that there was significant challenges with like these LLMs connecting like securely to like real business data and real workflows. And if you can't do that, then what are you going to use it for?
Yeah, just a nice toy.
Yeah. So basically, like any AI model out there, like required custom integration with every like business system. And if you did build this integration, they're extremely fragile, kind of like some routing topologies out there.
Some RIP v2s.
There we go. And they're very like non-transferable. So you kind of have to start over. And so that lack of standardized authentication, like having like granular permissions and things, kind of like what we come to expect with using products in 2025, just didn't exist. And that's when I remember like I was like, man, this is really cool. This is really neat technology. Can anybody actually adopt it and do something with it?
Yeah.
And, so I went from like, okay, this is cool, this is great, to like now I'm like very bullish on AI with, MCP getting rolled out and kind of what MCP means and having had the opportunity to build one, under Peter's tutelage a little bit, Peter Sprigata, who, for those out there that don't know who that is, he brought Ansible for networking to market. So, he's very methodical with software development and really thinking through not just saying, hey, we're going to, take a whole, open API schema and use some tool to like import it and make an MCP server. He really is architecting it and he's putting out the design and thinking through it. He really thought through like every detail, which was being like on the ground floor of this like technology. There's a lot of examples out there, but a lot of the examples are, hey, we imported this schema file and we have this MCP server now that can just talk to all endpoints. There you go. But in order to be adoptable, it has to be more than that. You have to think through. There's a lot of other, obviously, considerations that you have to think through. So,
I think what you just talked about really resonates with what Sam Altman, which is the CEO and I don't know if founder or co-founder for OpenAI, talked about in AI Ascent in just the recently concluded AI Ascent from Sequoia. And what he talked about was first, they have this cool model, which was, I think was a 2.0 at the time, that they didn't know what to do and they don't know what are the use cases. So they just thought, okay, they're going to put it out there. And then they found out people love to chat with it and they put out an interface, but they were still curious on what people use it for. Then it's like copy editing, but then nothing much else, right? Besides asking the weather and get a crack out of like asking dad jokes or whatever. But then, once they got that over, they start seeing a second point that you made about different generation, how they use it differently. And he talked about how, maybe people our age use it as a search engine alternative because it's more robust, it's more comprehensive and cross over different domains. And you don't have to go verify like each of the links down there. However, the younger generation, and by younger, I'm meaning maybe like the college students or, maybe even younger, that they use it as an operating system. They have all this like augmentation, all these like prompts that they saved up so that like 10 different chats like have different personalities and contexts and so on. So I think that is really just the interesting part for me, how, everybody talk about the increase in adaptation, how the accelerates. If I have 1 cent on every time I hear about how fast OpenAI gets to 1 million user, I would have like a whole $11 or something. But anyway, you get my point, right? So like different generational, I think that's the tricky part, is to understand the context they're using it and how do we tag into that. I mean, I don't want to have this communication gap between me and my daughters, how they use it, and they look up to me and say, what is the best way to use it? I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe I should go ask whatever cloud model I have. I don't even want to say ChatGPT anymore because there's so many out there. So I think that's a very interesting point. I do want to tech, because we talk so much about AI. Do you think that is the most exciting tech innovation that you encounter recently, or is there something else? Because AI is so broad, right? So maybe if we zoom into that, you talk about MCP and agentic. Is that something that you find the most exciting about, or is it something else that we missed?
that's a good question. I want to preface whatever's going to come out of my mouth here in the next few minutes.
Is that your own opinion? Like, we're not a lawyer.
Yeah, I just want to preface my answer by saying, like, my mindset or opinion for like AI broadly has been one of like the majority of implementations today of AI
Mm-hmm.
are really just features. They're not products.
Mm-hmm.
They really enhance existing solutions rather than create brand new things.
Right.
It's not that I didn't accept AI, but I just didn't. I'm like so focused, especially when you're at a startup and you're lean and you put resources behind something. Like you have to figure out ROI. You have to figure out how to measure it. You have to do a lot of different things in order to make it like real.
Right.
And so my like aha moment with how is this AI thing real? You know, we talked about critical mass came when Anthropic did release MCP last November. And I'll say this, like when you see like it's completely open source, you can go to the GitHub and inspect the code, but when you see like an open source protocol, get released by an AI platform,
Mm-hmm.
and it sees like universal adoption across competing AI platforms within like months.
Mm-hmm.
That signals to me that, okay, there's something different about this thing than your typical, hey, we're going to build a chatbot that's going to look at our documentation and you can ask questions. So it's much more real than that. And so, should we talk about what MCP is?
Yeah, yeah, no, please do. I think we definitely should cover maybe just what agents are and what MCP are. So maybe those two topics are relatively new to the audience.
Okay, so the thing that is hot right now that if you go on YouTube, you probably see a ton of is this A to A, agent to agent communications, where like basically agents are having conversations. And that for a while, I mean, that's where a lot of things are going and a lot of testing is happening. But if we just started MCP, which is Model Context Protocol, it's just basically a standardized communication protocol at the end of the day. Not too far removed from BGP in a sense, where like BGP runs on a router, except with MCP, we're routing context and not packets
Mm-hmm.
in a sense.
Yep.
And it's, essentially going to enable you to connect to your external tools, data sources, and like by design, it uses a few things that, maybe your audience has heard of.
Mm-hmm.
As a protocol, it's all client server architecture,
Yep.
built on, JSON RPC, and is like an architecture. And I think this is what makes it different. And this is what excites me,
Mm-hmm.
Eric. This really excites me is like, as an architecture, it really has like three main instruments working in concert one with another. So you have like your, what's referred to as like an MCP host, and that's your like user facing app, like maybe like Claude Desktop, or I like anything LLM or just VS Code really. But on these hosts, MCP clients manage the actual protocol communication with the external systems. And the MCP servers, which is what like a vendor like Itential may provide, they act as like a lightweight like adapter in a sense to like expose specific capabilities like your database stuff, APIs, business tools,
Right.
and so forth. And the thing that really makes this stand out is MCP actually, I hope I'm saying this right. MCP actually kind of inverts like your traditional client server relationships. It's like instead of your clients always, we're used to like, okay, client always initiates that request. MCP servers can request AI model completions, like while the clients maintain control over the model selection and privacy things that are really important. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a data scientist, but I think this is one of the major underlying components that essentially facilitates or allows for more sophisticated, like, and very clean, like multi-step workflow based stuff, like on, bidirectional nature, which is where you layer on the agent to agent stuff atop it. So I think that's why this is like probably one of the more exciting things that I've seen as far as like innovation's concerned, because it kind of took what again, not to say that I thought AI was like a nothing burger, but I just couldn't tie it back to business outcomes. But I think this is like that thing that ties it back to being able to drive business, to measure things, ROI, security, having OAuth support and all those goodies, being able to do granular permissions, only exposing certain things to certain people or devices, like all that stuff is just much cleaner.
Yeah, because the infrastructure is already in place. So a few weeks ago, we had the Not About GPT. We had Brad, the VP of Professional Services, and a customer, Matthew, on talking about Not About GPT. And toward the end, they also mentioned about MCP being on the horizon and what's kind of driving that motivation on doing that. So I do appreciate you going over it a little bit deeper on like the protocol level. So I think that's very useful for people just to get a idea of it, and maybe I don't know how good an analogy, but it's almost like APIs, right? Like, so it used to be if you just go to a client server, you're the client, you're a browser, and you're asking for contents on the server side, and that was it. And the server has to have everything. But then the server would start talking to other servers, and they don't talk to via browsers, they talk to via APIs, and that just opened up a whole wide world because now it's becoming a decentralized model, whether it used to be a centralized. And when you're decentralized, everybody get to specialize and become much less fragile, and should I say anti-fragile. So they even excel into this, change agents and risk factors and so on. So I think that is what I see as being the excitement. And what you just talked about was we've seen this before. We know that it works where if you make a, Amazon.com, you've launched that page. Yeah, you saw that page, but there's 300 plus API calls on the back end. So now you have this, client where you could have a aggregation of all these other resources where the potential is almost boundless. And for me, I'll tell you my aha moment. You talked about yours is that when I actually use the agentic code editor for a cursor to be exact, that just changed the whole perspective for me. Things I couldn't grasp or learn in over 2 years, which is like Swift programming for, iOS app, they're able to code it up in 20 minutes for me. And they're also teaching me at the same time. They taught me how the thought process was, and I could ask it limitless questions and wouldn't get bored or throw their shoes at me. As opposed to like your previous example on the very thorough and strict manager, right? So it's almost like a kind of version of that who doesn't get tired. So that was the breakthrough moment for me. And like you, I wasn't a complete believer, but now I'm much more ambitious on what I could do with it. And I could see the possibilities beyond just whatever is out there right now because of the MCP agentic and multi-agent, multi-agentic, whatever, right? Like this whole match network.
Yeah, marketing. Yeah, there's going to be a lot more terms for this stuff. So we're going to need a spreadsheet. Yeah, it's so funny you say you're using Cursor. I just started using Claude Code recently.
Yep.
Like I think I've kind of been messing when I've had time poking around the last 2 weeks with Claude Code, and
Yeah.
I just wish I could lock myself in a room and just go and mess with it for like a few days. You and I both have a lot of competing priorities and time stuff, but yeah, it's so cool. It's kind of opens your mind to the possibilities. Like if you want to completely bootstrap a project, if you have everything cloned to your machine and it can go through and learn exactly what's happening in that project, recommend changes. You can even, like I tested it out and set a price limit last week, and I gave it like on a sandbox machine. I basically said, hey, you can actually let it run in full admin mode to not prompt you, yes, make change, no. So it's
Yeah.
going through and it's building, testing, iterating, building, testing, iterating. I went and got coffee. I think I stepped away for like 45 minutes and I came back, and what I asked it to build was built and worked
Yeah.
perfectly without any intervention at all. And it wasn't a simple thing. And of course it was net new. It was not like it was had brownfield considerations,
Right.
but it's a pretty powerful tool.
That was my experience as well, is that I think they called it like the YOLO mode at some point where it's just like, hey, do you feel lucky, right? Like that old Google thing. But
Yeah.
it's like on steroid where it just continue integrate and accept every time versus that. So I think what people really need to do is just to go experiment and just go play around, but having the mindset of playing. To begin with, don't think about your existing code base and how do I, refactor something that has thousands and thousands of lines of code that has to collaborate between 10 different developers and the product owners and all that stuff, right? Don't begin with that. Begin with something that you always had the itch to try out, but you were limited by your capability. For me, it's always been mobile apps, right? Like I went through React Native, and if you follow me on Mastodon, I did the 100 days of Swift and I gave up by like day 56 or whatever. So that's not even like the first time I tried Swift, right? Like I have my Coursera courses or like my Udemy courses to back me up that I have like watched for 10 minutes and gave up. So those are the things that I've always wanted to do but couldn't do. And now I could see me doing something at least at a prototype level until I could go hire like a real Swift developer or whatnot. So I think that's the mindset that people should have, or the mindset that I recommend is just go play with it. There's the free version, or you could spend $20 for 1 month and have at it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, as far as just getting started.
Yeah, I think what you said is just about perfect. One thing that I try not to lose is I've gotten busier over the years. I try not to lose like that sense of excitement when like a new technology comes out And I just want to, exactly what you said. I'm not looking at any legacy stuff. I'm not thinking about anything else. Just like purely excited to see how this new thing works,
Hmm.
pushing the limits, maybe trying to break it, just figuring it out. And that's what really excites me about the technology. And it's kind of sad. I've seen a lot of people over the years that kind of moved up the ladder and they got to be successful by having that joy and putting in those hours for the things they really love to do. But then they got higher up the org chart and they ceased to do that type of work and their whole attitude, everything just changed. So, yeah, if you're listening, don't lose the things that you enjoy because when you do that, things just kind of go downhill. And if you do things you enjoy, it's kind of a multiplier effect as well. So,
That just reminded me whenever I feel down or whenever I feel that moment where I realize I'm losing that drive or losing that interest, I always go back to watch Steve Jobs. There's only one commencement speech that he gave at Stanford. What he ends with was stay hungry, stay foolish, right? So I've always wanted to be that. And I even engrave it on the first iPad Air that I had was from Apple and they gave it free engraving. That's why I engrave on the back, stay hungry, stay foolish. And I think that pretty much sums it up perfectly. It's just if you look at Raspberry Pi and then you think, oh my God, this will never replace my laptop. I think you're right. Like, especially Raspberry Pi 2 or some of the earlier B plus version that came out, right? It's not going to replace your laptop. And it's not going to be even like one laptop per child, or if you remember that project, because a lot of people compare those two, but it is what it is. And you should just have that interest mindset, that curiosity, go try it out. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't like it. That's okay. And the risk of trying it out is really just your own time and, some of your maybe like $15 or minimum amount of investment. And what do you know? You might just discover your next passion project for the next 20 years. So why not just go try it out? And in this case, I think you should have enough people tell you about AI by now that you should be able to try it out and you want to, just know more about it.
so like it's going to create a lot of jobs. After actually building like real things with it,
Hmm.
one thing I realized, and I'll try not to be long-winded here, but like something that happened with cloud that I was really deep in for many years was the onset of cloud. There was this like perception that you could just build. You didn't have to think about scoping and sizing things. And it's like, oh, this is just unlimited. We can just keep throwing and building unoptimized, unoptimized, unoptimized. And wow, did I have to spend so many years reeling in some of those mistakes? But that's kind of like with AI, like there's so much unoptimized stuff going out there. And you really still need technical practitioners that understand the underlying technologies that can really figure out how to optimize it. Because if you're just exposing a gazillion API calls, you're having MCP hit an API and just hammer it to death, you're going to get rate limited. Where does this API live? And it's going to have a downstream performance of impact to like a lot of different things.
Hmm.
So like building optimized things is actually becoming, I think that's going to be like the new cool, I think, going in the future, which makes me really excited because it's something that, that needs to happen, I think. And it sets good example for the next generation of builders.
So I think I want to elaborate on that a little bit. So what you were saying was in the beginning of the cloud, people thought it was going to replace their jobs for whatever reason, but it ended up not, right? Just creating more functions and more type of jobs that did not exist before. So what you're saying is now you see the same trajectory with AI that there's going to be more jobs that's being created. You just don't know what those are. Is that what you're saying or?
Yeah, I kind of said a few things or I kind of conflated a few things. But yeah, that was the first thing is I saw a lot of hesitance.
Mhm.
I was lucky early on to, well, I don't know if this is lucky or just I was young, but when AWS first hit the scene, like network engineers were like, get out of here. And then, I remember when like VPC came out, Direct Connect came out, then, we
Yep.
were doing site to site VPNs. Network folks didn't want to touch this stuff. They're like, that's going to be our job. It was kind of like with automation. A lot of the folks that I worked with at the time didn't want anything to do with it. So I always do this. Again, I had a mentor way, way back that was like, nobody else is jumping in. You get in there and you volunteer, So like I have a habit of volunteering for stuff. So I was that network engineer that was like, hey, I'll own this.
Right, right, right.
I want to get in there. And, it turns out like that created a ton of network engineering jobs that were more cloud focused. But at the same time, I was also saying that like this, just because the resources were there, folks would build, 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 but they would build in an unoptimized way on cloud infrastructure.
Mm.
And I'm seeing, it's definitely happening with AI as well. Things are being built with the trade-off of getting to market as fast as humanly possible,
Hmm.
but also being unoptimized, high burn rate. And that's not good. And I think that's coming to that inflection point to where, I mean, money doesn't grow on trees. Things have to be optimized. The stuff can run away from you really quick.
According to my daughter, they do, but according to the rest of the world, they don't.
Yeah. That's where, folks, there's so much opportunity. It's opportunity. And if you want to get into new things and you want to get outside of the network engineering, maybe the automation space and start learning about these areas, that it's the ground floor still. The sky's the limit. And it's a great new set of skills that you can add to the tech toolbox, that'll future proof you a little bit.
On that note, I do want to reference your talk. Was it AutoCon 1 that you gave a talk on just working with other teams and how to evangelize, back to evangelism again, how to evangelize your agenda without pissing people off, basically, right?
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing, but you said it more elegantly. I do want to reference that talk and maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you said and maybe just summarize it in 30 seconds.
Yeah, so basically, kind of the genesis of that whole thing was working in large companies and getting to that point to where things just weren't getting done.
Yeah.
It's like big companies have this appearance like they're going so fast, go fast, 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 but in reality, not a lot is actually happening. And my way of actually trying to solve that problem and being successful, varying degrees of success across a few companies was, extending that olive branch, understanding the surrounding teams, and really understanding how decisions were made within those companies. Like a lot of recon, really, a lot of intelligence gathering and just a lot of, I took so many people out to lunch, one company I worked with, and that paid dividends. Like that was fantastic because,
Never eat alone, man.
yeah, those are the folks that were critical in getting some things across the board.
Right.
So kind of like starting off at the bottom and kind of working your way up to where you can come to the point to where you can get that network automation project or whatever it is that you're working on across the finish line. Because I see it far too much in the past. It's like bad ideas would win all the time. And when I would break that down as to why they won, it was because they were more polished, they were more researched, even though it was a bad idea.
Hmm.
They had more data,
Hmm.
even if it wasn't good data.
Hmm.
They had more, artillery to work with, which I didn't have. So how do you build that? And it's kind of a system that probably would work anywhere where there's many chains of management, directors, VPs, associate VPs, senior VPs, director, senior director, lots of layers to move through. But yeah.
Right. I would agree with that because I mean, I remember at many of the Fortune 50 companies that I've worked with, they will have stack ranking on projects, right? Because they always do it by quarter, whether they do it by quarter, annually, or even they do it both, right? They kind of do a quarterly and the annual at the end. And you need to present this project in a way that matches your business outcome, that matches your company's goal, that you could convince people. And that's a completely different skill set to present and to convince and to communicate versus just on the technical merits of that project, right? Obviously, this is good, better than, this is better than the next one in your mind, but how do you communicate that to other person in a way that he or she cares about? That is the tricky part. And back to what you were saying, a lot of times maybe the best idea doesn't bubble up, and that is the problem, right? That is the problem for a lot of big companies and how small players could win, the startups could win because they just move more agile and they execute a little bit better.
Yeah. And one last thing there is, the folks that have the pocketbooks that are going to make the decisions, they don't care about your BGP or your Python. They're living in like spreadsheets and PowerPoints.
Yeah.
They speak a completely different language, and that never gets easy, but you have to learn how to speak their language. If you can't speak their language, you're going to not have the same measure of success. If you can learn to speak a few different languages, learn to speak that exec speak, it'll suit you well.
Yeah, yeah. Learn what ROI means, right? You mentioned
Yeah.
ROI. Learn what a cost center is, where all these other, even on the very personal level, right? What options are, what RSUs are, and yeah, hopefully early in your career rather than later, right? So, like I said, I learned the hard way, and things I wish I could have learned sooner, but they were just didn't come by or didn't have the resources. But now you have more. You have podcasts, you have AI who could teach you how to be more empathetic and just practice. They can't replace you, but they can help you.
For sure. Totally agree.
Yeah. So we could just talk about everything since we I mean, I didn't even talk about how the first time I saw the inventor of VPC that came to, because when I was with AWS, they were actually developed in Virginia, and in Seattle, he would like come to the Seattle office and talk about VPC and all that, and how I just like fell off the chair and then have to pick my jaw off the ground. It's like, this is going to change everything, right? So I didn't even talk about that. So we could go on forever. I think I could go on for another 3 hours if we have the time, but I'll invite you back, man. Can we expect more from you in the future? Maybe when some guests just, flip out of me.
For sure. Yeah, we got to do some more crossover stuff because, yeah, we need to go down maybe we can come over on my pod next time and do, I think going into VPC, cloud native segmentation, transit gateways, like how that stuff has evolved. It's just like a super interesting story. And there's so much there. It's mini episodes probably. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. I don't even know. Like, I would run the danger of running into like maybe disclose some stuff that we're not supposed to talk about, right? Because I was at the time with CloudFront, and I deployed the first few CloudFront, and even before the contract, we established corporation in places like we didn't have an entity. Like Amazon wasn't in Singapore, Amazon was in India, and so CloudFront is always the one that goes out, establish an entity, put out 5 racks, and then do the peering, right? Do the peering, do the transit gateway and all that stuff, and backhaul it to wherever data centers are. So no, I love to kind of reminiscent about the old days and listen to you on how to adapt and, the practical ways. But I'll just be that guy who's at the corner and go, oh, wow.
Well, the good thing is not a ton of networking has changed too much. So there's a lot of new and shiny, but hey, you still have a lot of BGP and DNS.
For better or for worse, there's still a lot of BGP and DNS.
IPv6 is still not fully adopted everywhere. Okay.
However, you could listen to IPv6 podcast on Packet Pusher and get from there, right?
Such a good show. They've motivated me to relearn IPv6 a few times over the years. By learn, I mean like dip my toe back in and like destroy my home network and my home lab.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I've done that a few times. Good times.
Yeah, neighbor discovery, all that stuff, and like the all 128 bits or whatnot. So William, let's just end on that high note right there on what to look forward to, and how can people find more about you or follow your work? What's the best place to kind of get in touch with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, William-Collins. And then, yeah, the podcast, all the fear and everything, the RSS link's going to change, but still going to be the Cloud Gambit hosted by myself and Yvonne Sharp. So I've rebranded, so kind of going through this rebranding exercise now. So like some of the other channels like Instagram, I have a TikTok. I haven't figured out how to really work it. Things just get posted to it, and that's about it. But yeah, everything, all my other handles now, like I rename. It's so hard to find a name that's not taken now. Everything's just taken up. But yeah, I'm macro engineered on like Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and all those places, which I post semi-frequently, just like a mix of different types of content. And then YouTube as well.
We'll have all of those links in the show notes. And if I do remember, I'll go ahead and post the talk from AutoCon 1. It's an excellent talk. I think it's one of those rare ones because as of now, they still don't have different tracks that separates business versus tech. But that's one of those talks that actually, crosses over to both tech and business, which I totally agree on. You have different skill sets that you have to learn to kind of advance yourself, your career, in maybe just your public profile. So yeah, we'll have all those in the show notes. And thanks again, William, for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation. And it's an open invitation. You could come back whenever you want.
Awesome. Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Do you have any feedback for Network Automation, our guest William today, or this particular episode? Please do send us some follow-ups at packetpushers.net/follow-up. We do want to hear from you. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not hard to find, so just search for Eric Cho, Python, and you'll see me on LinkedIn. And please do check out our website at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos, and so much more. You can find podcasts such as Network Break, Heavy Networking, Packet Protector, and so much more. And of course, the Cloud Gambit coming in July to the pack catcher near you. And we do want to thank you, the wonderful listeners, for your support. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.